Betrayal doesn't hit you like a hammer. It's quieter than that, a soft, insidious thing that creeps into your life without you noticing. For me, it didn't come in the form of a confession or a confrontation. It came through a video, an innocent piece of footage meant to capture one of the happiest days of my life, my daughter Amelia's wedding. Amelia had always been our pride and joy. At 23, she was everything Evelyn and I could have hoped for: smart, strong, kind, and fiercely independent. Her wedding, a year ago, had been the culmination of everything we'd worked so hard to give her. A day filled with laughter, love, and promises of a bright future. Evelyn, my wife of 20 years, had thrown herself into the preparations with the kind of energy I'd always admired. She made sure every detail was perfect, from the flowers to the table settings, her face lighting up every time she talked about it. I thought it was the best day of our lives. It wasn't until a few weeks ago that I realized how wrong I'd been. That evening had started out like so many others. I was sitting in our living room, a glass of bourbon in hand, scrolling through old photos and videos from the wedding. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just reliving the moments, the small, beautiful details that had made that day so special. Amelia's radiant smile as she walked down the aisle. Evelyn wiping a tear from her cheek during the father-daughter dance. The way the sunlight had filtered through the trees during the outdoor ceremony. It was perfect. Then I clicked on a video I hadn't seen before. It was taken by one of the guests during the reception, a candid shot of the dance floor, people laughing and swaying to the music. I smiled at first, recognizing faces, remembering snippets of conversation. And then my eyes landed on Evelyn. She was standing at the edge of the dance floor, drink in hand, talking to a man whose face I didn't immediately place. I rewound the video, pausing on his face. He was familiar, but not someone close to us. A coworker, maybe? Someone from our office? I'll let the video play again, slower this time. There was something about the way they stood, too close, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that felt private, intimate. His hand brushed her back, a small, fleeting touch that would have been easy to miss if I hadn't been watching so closely. And then she smiled at him, a soft, knowing smile I hadn't seen in years. My chest tightened. It wasn't just a friendly exchange. I knew Evelyn well enough to recognize the way she laughed when she was trying too hard to hide something. I replayed the video again and again, trying to convince myself that I was wrong, that it was nothing more than an innocent conversation. But the more I watched, the more the small details stood out. Her hand lightly brushing his arm. The way they leaned toward each other, as if no one else in the room existed. I closed the laptop, my heart pounding. For the rest of the evening, I tried to push the image from my mind, but it clung to me like smoke. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Evelyn standing there, her guard down, sharing something with that man that was no longer meant for me. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Was it just a moment, or was it something more? The question swirled in my head, growing heavier with every passing hour. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. Instead, I spent the next few days combing through every photo, every video from the wedding, searching for answers. And the more I looked, the more undeniable it became. There were other moments, small ones scattered throughout the day, an exchange of glances during dinner, a fleeting touch as they passed each other near the bar. His name, I finally remembered, was Daniel. He'd been introduced to me at the wedding as one of Evelyn's colleagues. I'd shaken his hand, thanked him for coming, and thought nothing of it. Now, every memory of him felt like a sharp edge, cutting into the life I thought we'd built together. But what shook me the most wasn't just the betrayal. It was where it had happened. In the middle of our daughter's wedding, on a day that should have been sacred. Evelyn had brought him into our lives, into the heart of our family, as if she thought no one would notice. The audacity of it made my stomach turn. I began replaying moments from the past year, dissecting every interaction, every late night at the office, every unexplained text or sudden mood shift. I'd always trusted Evelyn. I'd never had a reason not to. But now, looking back, I saw the cracks that had been there all along, cracks I'd been too blind, or maybe too complacent to see. The realization settled over me slowly, like a tide creeping in. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a betrayal of everything we'd built, everything we'd promised each other. And I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her for it. But I didn't act right away. Not yet. I needed time to think, to plan, to understand what this meant for me, for Amelia, for the life I thought I had. Evelyn didn't know I knew. And for now, I was going to keep it that way. The morning after my discovery, the house felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself carried the weight of what I now knew. Evelyn moved through the kitchen with the effortless grace that had always drawn people to her. She looked poised, confident, and completely at ease, her expression one of practiced calm. It was no wonder she thrived in her role at the marketing firm, a rising star in a company known for crafting the perfect image for high-profile brands. She was their shining example, and I'd been proud of her for years. But now, every glance, every gesture felt rehearsed. How many times had I missed the signs? How long had she been perfecting the art of deception, while I'd been too distracted to notice? I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, my uniform still hanging neatly upstairs, untouched. Being a police officer had taught me a lot about reading people, about the small tells that gave away their lies. But this was something I hadn't seen coming. It wasn't just a betrayal that gnawed at me. It was the fact that she'd done it so well, hiding behind the trust we'd built over 2 decades. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she reached for it without hesitation, her movements smooth and practiced. My gaze followed her every move, cataloging the details. Her fingers moved quickly over the screen, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of her lips before she slipped the phone back into her bag. There was nothing unusual about it, and yet it set my teeth on edge. I wondered if that same phone held the messages she exchanged with him, Daniel, the man from the wedding. After she left for work, I lingered in the empty house, the stillness amplifying the churn of my thoughts. She was off to the glossy offices of her firm, where every detail was designed to exude success and charm. And I was here, a man whose job revolved around uncovering the truth, now grappling with the realization that the biggest lie of all had been unfolding right under my nose. It wasn't long before I found myself standing in front of her phone, left charging on the kitchen counter. It felt like a test, as if she'd left it there to see if I would take the bait. But I didn't hesitate. My hands moved with the steady calm I'd practiced 1,000 times before, searching for answers the way I'd been trained to do. Her messages were meticulously clean, too clean. There were no stray texts from Daniel, no calls that raised suspicion. But years on the force had taught me that even the most careful people left traces. It didn't take long to find the hidden folder in her email, labeled Projects. A perfectly innocuous name, and yet it caught my attention immediately. Inside, her correspondence was mostly work-related, filled with client updates and marketing proposals. But there, buried among the mundane, was a single email from Daniel. The subject line read, "This weekend." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The title alone was enough to confirm what I already knew. My jaw tightened as I stared at the screen, my mind racing with the implications. She hadn't just been careless. She'd been bold, tucking her affair into the fabric of her daily life as if it were just another task on her to-do list. I placed the phone back exactly as I'd found it, every detail accounted for, and stepped away. Confronting her now would be too easy, too impulsive. I needed more proof, more understanding, more time to decide what came next. Evelyn had spent years crafting a life built on image and control, and I wasn't going to let her slip out of this without feeling the full weight of what she'd done. By the time she returned home that evening, her usual self-assured demeanor was firmly in place. She set down her bag and moved through the house with the same air of composure she always carried, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I watched her carefully, every movement, every glance, a piece of the puzzle I was piecing together. She was so comfortable in her routine, so confident in the idea that she had me fooled. That night, as I sat alone in the dark, the house silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards, I made a decision. This wasn't just about Evelyn and her betrayal. It was about the life we'd built, the lies she'd woven into its foundation, and the choice I now had to make. I wouldn't act yet, not until I was sure. But one thing was certain. The woman I'd loved, the the woman I'd trusted, was gone. And in her place was a stranger I didn't recognize. The house felt colder that week, as though the very walls had absorbed the weight of my discovery. Evelyn moved through her days with the same polished efficiency that had always defined her, her every action a performance for an audience that wasn't there. I said nothing, kept my routine intact, and waited. But the questions gnawed at me, and I needed answers. Answers I couldn't get from her just yet. It was then that I remembered Ethan. Amelia's husband had always struck me as a good man, quiet but thoughtful, steady in a way that reminded me of myself at his age. He worked in the same marketing company as Evelyn, though in a much different role. While Evelyn's job put her in boardrooms and strategy meetings, Ethan's was more grounded, handling operations and logistics. If anyone could give me insight without suspecting why I was asking, it was him. I reached out to Ethan under the guise of casual conversation, suggesting we meet for coffee. He agreed immediately, his tone friendly and eager to catch up. The idea of lying to him twisted something in my gut, but I told myself it wasn't entirely a lie. I wasn't just fishing for information. I genuinely wanted to know if he'd noticed anything. If the man my daughter had married had seen the cracks I hadn't. We met at a small cafe not far from the station. Ethan arrived early, as I expected, his posture relaxed and his smile easy. He greeted me warmly, the respect in his demeanor evident, and I felt a pang of guilt for the questions I was about to ask. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, settling into the seat across from him. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but I barely noticed it. My mind was already working through how I would approach the conversation. "No problem," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "How are things? Amelia told me you've been working a lot lately." I nodded, keeping my tone casual. "You know how it is. Things pile up, but that's not why I wanted to meet. I was curious about your work, how things are going at the company. You've been there a while now, right?" He tilted his head, surprised by the question, but obliging nonetheless. "A little over 3 years. It's been good, challenging sometimes, but I like it." I let the conversation flow naturally, steering it toward the dynamics of the office. Ethan spoke openly, sharing anecdotes about projects he'd worked on, the people he respected, and the inevitable challenges of corporate politics. His honesty was disarming, and for a moment, I almost forgot my ulterior motive. But then he mentioned Evelyn. "Your wife's a legend there," he said with a laugh. "Everyone knows Evelyn. She's got this reputation for being unflappable, always on top of things. A lot of people look up to her." I nodded slowly, my jaw tightening. "Sounds like she's made quite an impression." "She has," he said, then hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. "Though I guess it's not always positive. Some people say she can be intense, especially when it comes to certain projects." I leaned forward slightly, my voice careful. "Certain projects? What do you mean?" Ethan shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "Just that she's very hands-on with some clients. There's this one guy, Daniel. He's been working with her on a few big accounts. They seem to have a good dynamic, but I don't know. People talk, you know? Office gossip and all that." My chest tightened at the name. Daniel. So Ethan knew him. "What kind of gossip?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain neutral. Ethan's brows furrowed. "Honestly, it's probably nothing. People just like to speculate. Evelyn's very professional, but Daniel's, well, he's the kind of guy who likes attention. He flirts a lot, jokes around. Some people think he crosses lines, but I haven't seen anything myself." I nodded again, processing his words. Ethan's loyalty to Evelyn was evident. He didn't want to think poorly of her, didn't want to assume the worst. But the way he spoke about Daniel, the subtle hesitation in his tone, told me everything I needed to know. There was something there, even if Ethan didn't see it. As our conversation continued, I steered it towards safer topics, asking about Amelia, their plans for the future, anything to keep him from suspecting my true intentions. But inside, my thoughts churned. If Daniel had a reputation for crossing lines, how far had he gone with Evelyn? And how much of it had she welcomed? When we parted ways, Ethan clasped my shoulder with a friendly grin, his sincerity cutting deeper than any suspicion ever could. "I'm glad we got to catch up. If you ever need anything, just let me know." I forced a smile, thanking him, and walked back to my car, my mind racing. Ethan didn't know. He had no idea what was happening beneath the surface, and that made it worse somehow. My daughter had married a man who trusted implicitly in the goodness of the world, and here I was, unraveling the very fabric of it. As I drove home, the weight of it all settled over me like a storm cloud. I had the name, I had the details, and now I had to decide what to do with them. Evelyn had built her life on a foundation of appearances, of carefully crafted lies. But the truth was beginning to seep through the cracks, and I was determined to let it shatter her illusions. The game wasn't over. Not yet. Let me know if you'd like to adjust or expand any part of this. When I got home that evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Evelyn wasn't back from work yet, and the empty rooms felt like they were waiting, holding their breath. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, keys in hand, staring into the shadows of what used to be our life. A life I was now realizing had been built on lies. The conversation with Ethan had confirmed what I already knew in my gut. This wasn't a misunderstanding, and it wasn't paranoia. Evelyn was betraying me, and Daniel was her accomplice. But I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed proof. Something concrete she couldn't talk her way out of or twist into some elaborate excuse. I'd spent years chasing down lies as a police officer. Now it was time to do the same in my own home. The first place I started was her phone. Evelyn had always been protective of it, but I knew her habits well enough to know when she let her guard down. Sure enough, she'd left it charging on the kitchen counter, just like the morning I'd found the email. I picked it up, scrolling quickly and methodically through her apps. Messages, emails, calendars. Everything was clean. Too clean. It was as if she'd anticipated this moment, scrubbing away any obvious traces of guilt. But even the best liars left clues. I navigated to her cloud storage account, a detail she'd likely overlooked. There, buried among mundane work files and family photos, I found a series of hidden folders. Most were labeled innocuously, reports, drafts, proposals. But one stood out. Personal. My stomach churned as I opened it. Inside were photos. Most were harmless. A snapshot of Amelia laughing at the wedding. A few pictures of Evelyn's co-workers at some office event. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. There were candid photos of Daniel, taken in the office, at dinners, even on what looked like a business trip. One photo in particular made my blood run cold. It was a selfie of the two of them, their heads close, his hand on her shoulder, both of them smiling like they were the only two people in the world. I closed the folder, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. This wasn't just a fling. It was deliberate, calculated. She carried him into every aspect of her life, documenting it as if she wasn't dismantling our marriage in the process. Next, I turned my attention to her laptop. Evelyn had a habit of working late into the night, and she often left her laptop open on the dining table, trusting that I wouldn't touch it. She underestimated me. I logged in with her password, something I'd memorized long ago, and started sifting through her files. Emails between her and Daniel were tucked away, disguised as routine correspondence. Most were innocuous on the surface, but a careful eye could spot the subtleties, the too familiar tone, the inside jokes, the way she signed off with a playful, looking forward to Friday, that made my stomach twist. Then I found the reservations. A hotel booking under her name, coinciding with one of her so-called business trips. The address matched the location I'd seen in the email subject line. This weekend. My chest tightened as I pieced it together. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. It was right there, bold as brass, waiting for me to find it. I took screenshots of everything, saving them onto a USB drive I kept in my desk drawer. Photos, emails, receipts, it was all there, a growing pile of evidence that told the story of her infidelity with chilling clarity. With every new discovery, the anger inside me simmered, threatening to boil over. But I didn't let it. Not yet. Surveillance was the next step. If Evelyn thought she could keep this hidden, she was sorely mistaken. That evening, I installed a small camera in the living room, tucked discreetly among the books on the shelf. It wasn't the kind of thing she'd notice. Evelyn never had much interest in the details of the house. The camera would capture everything, from her late-night phone calls to the moments when she thought no one was watching. I also placed a GPS tracker on her car. It wasn't difficult, just a small device affixed to the undercarriage, invisible unless you knew to look for it. With it, I'd know exactly where she went, every turn she made, every destination she visited. If she thought she could hide, she was wrong. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I reviewed every piece of evidence I'd collected, cataloging it meticulously. Each file, each screenshot, each timestamp became another nail in the coffin of the life she'd built on deception. I worked late into the night, my desk littered with notes and documents, the USB drive tucked safely in my pocket. I told myself this wasn't just about me, it was about Amelia. She deserved to know the truth about her mother, about the kind of person Evelyn had become. But deep down, I knew this was about more than that. It was about justice. Evelyn had betrayed me in the most personal, gut-wrenching way possible, and she was going to answer for it. The hardest part was acting normal. Every time Evelyn walked through the door, smiling like nothing was wrong, I had to force myself to smile back, to pretend that the ground beneath our marriage wasn't crumbling. I'd watch her pour herself a glass of wine, make polite conversation, and retreat to her office with her laptop, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. The proof was undeniable. Evelyn might have thought she was in control, that she could hide her secrets and keep me in the dark. But the truth was out now, and there was no going back. The question wasn't whether I'd confront her. It was when. And when I did, she'd have no choice but to face the truth. Revenge is a slow burn, a fire you have to tend carefully if you want it to truly consume the person who wronged you. For weeks, I let Evelyn continue her charade, blissfully unaware that her carefully curated life was about to come crashing down. When I finally struck, it wasn't with the fury of a husband scorned. It was with the cold, calculated precision of a man who had built a career unraveling lies. The first move was exposing her affair at work. Evelyn's marketing firm prided itself on its image. Their employees held to high ethical standards, especially in client-facing roles. I drafted a professional, yet scathing letter, attaching the incriminating photos and emails I had collected. It wasn't anonymous. I wanted them to know exactly who had written it. The firm's HR department called me within hours, their voices filled with concern, asking for more details. I provided them with everything they needed. Within a week, Evelyn's reputation at the company was in tatters. Daniel, the other half of this debacle, wasn't spared either. As her subordinate, his involvement painted an even uglier picture. Whispers of misconduct spread like wildfire. Evelyn was put on administrative leave, pending investigation. A polite way of saying she was being shown the door. By the time she realized what had happened, it was too late to control the narrative. Her colleagues avoided her, her once solid career crumbling under the weight of her own choices. Next, I turned to our finances. Over the years, Evelyn had grown comfortable with the lifestyle I'd worked hard to provide. She hadn't noticed that I'd quietly shifted key assets out of joint ownership during the weeks I was gathering evidence. The house, the savings, even her car, all were now under my name or protected by legal maneuvers she had no hope of contesting. By the time I filed for divorce, she was blindsided. The confrontation itself was almost anticlimactic. I presented her with everything: the photos, the emails, the hotel reservations. I watched her face shift from confusion to horror as she realized there was no way out. She tried to defend herself, to turn the blame on me, but her words fell flat against the mountain of evidence. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply handed her the divorce papers and told her she had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The final blow came at a family dinner I'd arranged under the guise of wanting to spend time with Amelia and her husband, Ethan. Evelyn arrived, likely hoping to salvage some semblance of normalcy. But the moment she walked into the room and saw Amelia's tear-streaked face, she knew. I told Amelia everything, carefully, gently, but without holding back. She deserved the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Amelia confronted her mother with a quiet fury I hadn't expected. "How could you?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady. "You didn't just betray Dad. You betrayed me. You brought him to my wedding. You smiled and pretended everything was fine while you were ruining everything we built as a family. Evelyn tried to apologize, but Amelia walked out before she could finish. It was the last time Evelyn saw her daughter in person. Revenge felt satisfying in the moment. Watching Evelyn's life unravel, seeing her face the consequences of her actions, it brought a sense of closure I didn't think was possible. But as the dust settled, I realized something important. Revenge is a cold comfort. It doesn't undo the betrayal. It doesn't erase the pain. And while it may feel like justice, it's a justice that comes at a cost. I lost something in the process, my peace. For weeks, months even, I lived in a state of anger, my every thought consumed by how to destroy the woman who had destroyed me. When it was over, I was left with an emptiness that no amount of revenge could fill. If I could offer advice to anyone facing betrayal, it would be this: don't let it consume you. Gather your evidence, protect yourself, and act decisively. But don't let revenge become your purpose. You deserve more than to be defined by someone else's wrongdoing. What I've learned is that healing doesn't come from destroying the person who hurt you. It comes from rebuilding yourself, piece by piece, into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Trust can be broken, but it can also be rebuilt. Sometimes not with the person who hurt you, but within yourself. Evelyn is gone now, a ghost in my past. I've started to rebuild my life, slowly but surely, finding solace in small things. My work, my daughter, the quiet peace of knowing that I've survived. If there's one thing I know for sure, it's this: betrayal doesn't define you. How you choose to move forward does.